I found out I had been cut out of my family's future in the most ordinary way possible through a calendar invite I was never supposed to see. It popped up on my phone at 6:12 a.m., just as I was pouring coffee in my apartment kitchen. The subject line read, "Estate Planning Review, Final Signatures." The location was my parents' house in Cedar Grove, New Jersey. The attendees were my father, my mother, my younger sister, and my uncle's attorney. My name wasn't there. At first, I assumed it was a mistake. My phone sometimes synced old shared calendars late. I stood there for a full minute, coffee growing cold, staring at the screen as if it might correct itself. It didn't. My name is Lauren Whitaker. I was 32 years old at the time, old enough to have learned restraint, young enough to still believe exclusion usually came with warning. I didn't call anyone. I didn't text my sister Emily even though she was listed on the invite. I didn't ask my parents what it meant. I had spent most of my adult life smoothing over moments like this, telling myself there was always a reasonable explanation. Instead, I sat down at the small table by my window and opened my laptop. People imagine betrayal as loud, explosive, something that announces itself. In my experience, betrayal prefers paperwork. It hides behind neutral language and polite scheduling. I worked as a compliance analyst for a mid-sized healthcare company in Newark. My job required me to notice patterns other people ignored and document risks before they became disasters. That skill had served me well professionally. I hadn't applied it to my own family, not until that morning. My parents owned a small but valuable manufacturing business, Whitaker Components. It wasn't flashy, but it had been around for decades, quietly supplying parts to larger corporations. My father, Richard Whitaker, built it from nothing. My mother, Helen, managed the books with a level of control that passed for devotion. Growing up, Emily and I were told the same story. One day, everything would be split fairly: the house, the company, whatever was left. It was said so often that it became background noise, something no one thought to question. Emily was 3 years younger than me. She stayed close, married early, had children, lived 10 minutes from our parents' house. She showed up for Sunday dinners and birthday parties and holiday photos. I moved an hour away for work, not far but far enough to be described as distant. The first sign something had shifted came months earlier, though I hadn't recognized it at the time. At Thanksgiving dinner, my father asked me casually whether I still felt connected to the business. I remember the way he said it, light, almost curious. "I review the contracts when you send them," I said. "You ask me to." My mother smiled tightly. Lauren has her own life now. It sounded like praise. It wasn't. Emily didn't look at me. She was cutting her son's turkey into careful, even pieces. That night, I drove home with a vague sense of having missed something important. I told myself it was just holiday tension. Back at my kitchen table, I opened the calendar invite details. The organizer was my uncle's lawyer, Martin Cole. I recognized the name immediately. He handled my grandmother's estate years earlier. That detail mattered. I forwarded the invite to my personal email and took a screenshot. Then I did something I had never done before. I searched public records. New Jersey's business registry is efficient if you know what you're looking for. Within 20 minutes I saw it, a filing dated 6 weeks earlier. An amendment to the ownership structure of Whitaker Components. My sister's name appeared as majority stakeholder. Mine did not appear at all. I felt a slow, precise pressure settle behind my eyes. Not anger, not panic, recognition. This hadn't happened overnight. I closed my laptop and sat back in my chair. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. I could hear the faint hum of traffic outside the ordinary world continuing without noticing anything had shifted. I thought about my parents' last visit. My mother insisting on meeting Emily's kids instead of coming to my place. My father cutting conversations short when I asked about long-term planning. I thought about my birthday forgotten for the first time in years. A belated text. An excuse about being busy. None of it had been loud enough to demand attention. All of it had been clear in retrospect. I didn't cry. Crying would have suggested surprise. I called my office and took a personal day. Then I put on my coat and drove to Cedar Grove. I didn't announce myself. I parked down the street and walked past the house slowly. The curtains were drawn. A car I didn't recognize sat in the driveway. The meeting was happening. I didn't knock. Instead, I sat in my car and waited. I watched people come and go. My uncle arrived first, then the lawyer. My sister's car pulled in last, right on time. No one looked down the street. I left before they came out. Back home, I made one call. Her name was Denise Harrington. She specialized in estate disputes and corporate governance. A colleague had recommended her years earlier. I'd saved the number and never used it. Until now. When she answered, her voice was calm, unhurried. "This is Denise. My name is Lauren Whitaker," I said. "I think my family just excluded me from my own inheritance." There was a pause, not surprise, interest. "Tell me what you know," she said. As I spoke, I felt something else take shape beneath the hurt. A steadiness, the quiet focus I recognized from my work. This wasn't about emotion. It was about control. And I had just realized I no longer had any, which meant the next move mattered more than anything I said out loud. Denise Harrington didn't react the way people usually do when you tell them something is wrong. She didn't gasp. She didn't offer sympathy. She didn't say she was sorry. She asked questions. "When was the last time you saw a signed copy of your parents' will?" she asked. "I haven't," I said. "Not recently. Not ever, actually. We were always told it was handled." "Who told you that?" "My mother. Always my mother." Another pause. I could hear her typing. "And the business. Have you ever signed a shareholder agreement?" "No." "Did you ever waive interest verbally or in writing?" "No." "Did you ever tell them you didn't want to be involved?" "No, I just didn't move back home." She stopped typing. That, she said calmly, is not a legal reason to exclude someone. I stared at the wall in my kitchen, noticing a faint crack near the window I had never bothered to fix. "I want you to do something," Denise continued. "I want you to stay quiet. Don't confront anyone. Don't ask questions. And absolutely don't let them know you've noticed yet." That advice ran against every instinct I had grown up with. In my family, silence meant compliance. Silence meant acceptance. This silence was different. "What do I do instead?" I asked. "You gather," she said, "and you observe." She told me exactly what to look for. Public filings, old emails, anything that suggested planning instead of impulse. She explained how families rarely act suddenly when money and control are involved. They rehearse, they prepare, they soften the ground. After we hung up, I opened a folder on my laptop and named it simply Records. I started with emails. I searched for keywords. Trust, planning, transition, Emily. The first thing I found was a message from my father dated almost 2 years earlier. "Lauren, can you look over this supplier contract? Your eye is better than mine." Attached was a draft agreement for Whitaker Components. I remembered reviewing it late one night, sitting at my kitchen table, marking clauses, sending it back with suggestions. I kept scrolling. Then I found something that made my stomach tighten. An email chain between my mother and my sister. Subject line: timing. The messages were brief, vague, but the tone was unmistakable. "Dad doesn't want conflict," my mother had written. "Better to finalize things while everything feels calm." Emily replied an hour later. "Lauren won't understand." My mother responded, "She doesn't need to." I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision. I remembered a conversation from the previous spring. Emily had called me sounding flustered. "Mom's been asking weird questions," she'd said, "about whether you'd ever move back, whether you're serious about your job." I'd laughed it off. She always asks that. Emily hadn't laughed. At the time, I'd assumed she was venting. Now I understood she was preparing. The more I looked, the clearer the pattern became. Small adjustments, quiet shifts. My involvement reduced gradually, never directly. Information shared later, decisions framed as already made. I had been eased out. That night my mother called. I watched the phone ring until it stopped. Then my father called. I answered that one. "Lauren," he said, sounding tired, "your mother mentioned you've seemed distant." I held the phone lightly, keeping my voice even. "I've been busy," I said. "Well," he replied, "family meetings are easier when everyone is on the same page." About what I asked. There was a pause, a small one, but enough. "We're just talking about the future," he said. "Nothing you need to worry about." I felt a strange calm settle over me. "I trust you," I said. It wasn't true, but it was useful. After we hung up, I sent Denise a summary of everything I'd found so far. Screenshots, dates, names. Her response came an hour later. "This is coordinated," she wrote, "not sloppy, which means it's vulnerable." I reread that sentence several times. The next morning, I requested copies of my grandmother's estate documents from Martin Cole's office, citing personal record keeping. I didn't mention the recent meeting. I didn't accuse anyone of anything. They sent the documents without resistance. That was when the final piece slid into place. My grandmother's trust had been structured to roll certain assets into Whitaker Components upon her death. Assets that increased the company's value significantly. assets my mother had quietly reclassified during the recent amendment, assets my sister now controlled. My name had never appeared in the new structure. I sat at my desk, hands folded, breathing slowly. I thought about every time my mother had told me I was too independent, too self-sufficient, too removed. I had mistaken that for criticism. It was strategy. Independence made me easier to exclude. That afternoon, Denise called again. "I'm going to file a request for disclosure," she said. "It's procedural. It doesn't accuse anyone, but it forces transparency." "What happens when they find out?" I asked. "They'll panic," she said. "Not outwardly, internally, and panic makes people reveal things." I pictured my mother at the head of the dining table, hands folded, confident in her control. I pictured Emily sitting quietly beside her, telling herself this was just how families worked. I didn't feel rage. I felt distance. The kind that lets you see the full shape of something without needing to step inside it. That night I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. Because once you realize you were never meant to be included, you stop asking how to be invited back in. You start asking how to take back what was taken quietly. And I had just reached that moment. The disclosure request went out on a Tuesday morning. Denise didn't dramatize it when she told me. She didn't say this was the turning point or that things would escalate fast. She simply said they'll have 30 days to respond. Most people don't use those days wisely. She was right. The first response didn't come in writing. It came in the form of my mother's voice on my voicemail. "Lauren," she said, measured but sharp. "Your uncle mentioned you've been asking for documents. I don't know why you're involving lawyers in family matters, but it's unnecessary and frankly hurtful." I listened to the message once, then I deleted it. Not out of spite, out of clarity. This was the moment where I would have explained myself in the past, smoothed it over, reassured her that I wasn't accusing anyone, that I just wanted to understand. That version of me would have been swallowed whole. Instead, I stayed silent. Silence unsettles people who are used to managing reactions. 3 days later, Emily texted me. "Can we talk? Mom's really upset." I stared at the message while standing in line for lunch at work. Around me, people chatted about weekend plans, deadlines, weather. Ordinary life continued, indifferent to the quiet fracture happening inside my family. I typed back one sentence. "I'm handling something professionally. I'm not discussing it privately." Her reply came quickly. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be." I didn't respond. That afternoon, Denise forwarded me an email from Martin Cole's office. Polite, formal, defensive in tone. They requested clarification on the scope of the disclosure request and asked whether I was alleging misconduct. Denise replied for me. "We are requesting transparency, not making allegations. At this time." That last part mattered. At this time, the waiting began. It was during that waiting that the emotional weight finally surfaced, not as pain, but as a dull pressure. The kind that makes you notice small things. The way my phone felt heavier in my hand. The way I hesitated before opening emails from anyone with my last name. I started remembering moments I had filed away as insignificant. The Christmas my parents gave Emily stock certificates as a symbolic gift and handed me a scarf. The time my father asked Emily to sit in on a vendor call but told me I didn't need to bother. The promotion at work my mother barely acknowledged, followed by a comment about how ambition can make women lonely. At the time, I had interpreted those moments as personal differences. Now I saw them as alignment. They were choosing who stayed central and who stayed peripheral. One evening, my father called unexpectedly. "Lauren," he said, "your mother tells me you're upset." "I'm not upset," I said truthfully. "Well," he continued, "this legal route feels extreme." I leaned back on my couch, staring at the ceiling. "Extreme compared to what?" I asked. "To just talking," he said. "We talked for years," I replied. "You decided things anyway." There was a long pause. "That's not fair," he said finally. "Fairness isn't the issue," I said. "Process is." He sighed, tired in a way that felt real. "You've always been so serious," he said. "Emily's better at letting things go." That sentence landed heavier than anything else he'd said, because it explained everything. Emily didn't let things go because she was generous. She let things go because letting go kept her included. I didn't say that out loud. "I have to go," I said instead. "I'm in the middle of something." He didn't stop me. 2 weeks into the 30-day window, the disclosures began arriving. Not all at once. Not cleanly. Partial documents. Redacted sections. Missing attachments. Denise reviewed them with a precision that bordered on surgical. "They're complying just enough to look cooperative," she said, "and just enough to hide the most important parts." She pointed out inconsistencies I wouldn't have noticed. Dates that didn't line up. Signatures missing where they should have been. Transfers explained vaguely or not at all. One document in particular stood out, a memo from my mother to the company's accountant dated over a year earlier. Lauren does not need to be included in operational decisions going forward. Please coordinate with Emily directly. No explanation, no justification, just instruction. Seeing it in writing did something unexpected. It didn't hurt. It clarified. This wasn't about my independence or my distance or my choices. It was about control. And control prefers predictability. I wasn't predictable. Emily was. By the third week, Denise had enough to escalate. She filed a formal petition requesting temporary suspension of the amended ownership structure pending full review. That was when the tone changed. My mother didn't call anymore. Emily stopped texting. Instead, a letter arrived at my apartment forwarded from my parents' address. Inside was a handwritten note from my mother. Family should not be handled like a business. I never expected this from you. I read it once and placed it back in the envelope. Then I placed it in the records folder. Because feelings don't override facts. The petition was scheduled for review. Not a hearing, not yet. But a review meant eyes, neutral eyes. And neutral eyes are dangerous to people who rely on narrative instead of truth. That night lying in bed, I felt the full weight of what I was doing. I was dismantling the structure that had defined my family for decades. Not with anger, not with accusations. With paperwork, with patience, with the refusal to step back into the role they had assigned me. I didn't know how far this would go. I didn't know what I would lose beyond what was already gone. But I knew one thing with certainty. The moment I stopped trying to be included was the moment I became impossible to ignore. The review date was set for a Thursday morning, quiet and procedural, the kind of thing that didn't feel dangerous unless you understood what it meant. Neutralize. Denise warned me that people often unravel before a formal review ever happens. They start correcting the record, she said, which usually means rewriting it. She was right again. The first sign came from my uncle. He called me late on Sunday evening, his voice unusually hesitant. Lauren, he said, your mother mentioned things have become complicated. I leaned against the counterphone, pressed to my ear. They became complicated when decisions were made without me, I said. He sighed. Your parents are under a lot of stress. They're not bad people. I didn't say they were, I replied. That legal filing, he continued, it feels aggressive. Transparency often does, I said. He went quiet. I signed something last year, he admitted. About the company, I thought it was administrative. My grip tightened slightly. What did you sign, I asked. I don't remember the details, he said quickly. Your mother explained it. I trusted her. That was the pattern. Trust flowed upward. Accountability flowed downward. Did the document change ownership percentages, I asked. Another pause. I think so, he said. Then it wasn't administrative, I replied. When we hung up, I sent Denise a summary immediately. Her response was blunt. That helps us. Monday morning, Emily showed up at my apartment unannounced. I almost didn't open the door. She stood there holding her phone, eyes rimmed red, her posture tense in a way I recognized from childhood. The look she wore when she had already decided how a conversation was supposed to go. You blindsided everyone, she said as soon as I let her in. I closed the door behind her. I followed procedure, I replied. That's not the same thing, she snapped. You're making Mom look manipulative. I studied her face carefully. She didn't need my help with that, I said. Her expression flickered, then hardened. You always think you're smarter than everyone, she said. That's why this happened. I felt something settle inside me, not anger, acceptance. This happened because you were willing to accept more control in exchange for comfort, I said. And I wasn't. She crossed her arms. You left, she said. You chose your job over us. I chose my independence, I replied. You chose proximity. Her voice rose. You're acting like a victim. I'm acting like a beneficiary whose rights were removed, I said evenly. She shook her head. You don't understand how much Mom relies on me. I understand exactly, I said. That's why this worked. She looked at me, then really looked at me, and for the first time I saw doubt. She said you wouldn't care, Emily said quietly. She said you'd moved on. That sentence did more damage than all the others combined. I nodded once. She needed to believe that I said. Emily left without saying goodbye. 2 days later, Denise called. They submitted a supplemental response, she said. And it's messy. What kind of messy, I asked. The kind where people explain too much, she replied. The documents contradicted earlier statements. Dates shifted. Rationales changed. My supposed lack of interest was emphasized repeatedly, almost defensively. One line stood out. Lauren Whitaker has consistently demonstrated emotional distance from family operations. Denise circled it in red. That's not a legal standard, she said. It's an opinion. Opinions don't hold up well under review. The morning of the review, I didn't attend in person. Denise handled it on my behalf. I sat at my desk at work answering emails, pretending it was an ordinary day. That was the strangest part. Nothing outwardly dramatic happened. No shouting, no confrontation. Just a panel of professionals asking questions my family had never expected to answer. When Denise called afterward, her tone was calm but firm. "They're concerned," she said. "About process, about influence, about exclusion." "What happens next?" I asked. "They'll recommend interim measures," she said. "Asset freezes, oversight, possibly a rollback." I closed my eyes briefly. That was more than I had expected. "They're also requesting additional testimony," she added, "from your uncle and your sister." I imagined Emily sitting in a neutral room being asked to explain decisions she hadn't initiated but had benefited from. I felt no satisfaction, just inevitability. That evening my father called. His voice sounded older than I remembered. "This didn't have to go this way," he said. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone resting lightly in my hand. "It went this way because no one asked me before I replied. We were trying to keep things simple," he said. "For whom?" I asked. He didn't answer. "Lauren," he said finally, "your mother is scared." I considered that. I was scared too, I said. For a long time, no one noticed. The call ended without resolution. The next morning, Denise forwarded me the interim recommendation. The amended ownership structure was to be suspended pending full review. My name was to be reinstated provisionally. Oversight would be assigned. It wasn't final, but it was enough. The shift had begun. That afternoon, Emily texted me. "They're asking questions I don't know how to answer." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back, "Tell the truth." She didn't reply. I went home that night and sat in the quiet of my apartment, noticing how calm my body felt. Not triumphant, grounded. Because the moment you stop trying to be understood by people who benefit from misunderstanding you, everything gets simpler. They were facing scrutiny now, not because I attacked them, but because I stepped out of the role that made everything easy for them. And once that happens, control begins to crack. Interim oversight changes the temperature of a room. You can feel it even if you're not there. Denise explained it to me over the phone the way she explained everything else, calmly, without drama. Once oversight is imposed, every casual decision becomes deliberate. Every shortcut becomes visible. Every assumption has to be justified out loud. For families built on informal control, she said that feels like an attack. I didn't correct her. By then, my parents' house had become very quiet. Emily told me later that the television stayed on all day, the volume low, as if noise itself had become dangerous. My mother stopped calling vendors directly. My father deferred everything to emails he drafted and redrafted before sending. They were being watched, not accused, not punished, observed. The first real consequence landed the following week. Whitaker Components Bank requested clarification on several internal transfers tied to the amended ownership structure, nothing illegal on its face. But the timing was questionable, the approvals incomplete. The bank froze one operational account pending explanation. That was when my mother broke her silence. She didn't call me. She called Denise. Denise let it go to voicemail. Then she forwarded it to me. "I don't know what Lauren thinks she's accomplishing." My mother said, her voice tight, controlled, angry in a way I rarely heard growing up. "This is damaging the company. She's hurting everyone." I listened once, then again. Then I closed my phone and went for a walk. The streets near my apartment were busy, people moving with purpose, lives intact, unaffected by the slow collapse of a structure they would never see. I passed a bakery opening for the day, the smell of bread, warm and ordinary, grounding me in the present. That was when it fully hit me. They still believed I was doing this to them. They couldn't imagine a version of reality where this wasn't about revenge, because revenge was the only language they understood. That afternoon, Emily called. I almost didn't answer. When I did, she sounded exhausted. "They want explanations," she said. "Everyone does. The board, the bank, the lawyers. Mom keeps asking me what to say." "And what do you say?" I asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "I didn't make the decisions. I just went along with them." There was a long pause. "Did you know I was being excluded?" I asked quietly. She hesitated. "Not like this," she said. "But yes, I knew they were finalizing things without you." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. Her voice cracked slightly. "Because if I did, it would have changed everything," she said. And I was afraid of what that would mean for me. There it was. Not cruelty. Fear. Fear of losing access. Fear of rocking the structure that protected her. "I understand," I said. She exhaled shakily. "Do you?" "Yes," I replied. "But understanding doesn't mean accepting it." She didn't argue. That night, Denise emailed me a draft of the next filing. A request for formal appointment of an independent trustee to manage the estate and oversee the company until final resolution. This escalates things, she wrote, but it also stabilizes them. I read the document carefully. It was clean, factual, unemotional. It didn't accuse my parents of malice. It accused the structure of imbalance. That distinction mattered. I approved it without edits. The trustee appointment triggered something unexpected. People started talking. Not publicly, not dramatically, but in the quiet ways that matter. A longtime operations manager asked me if I'd be attending the next leadership call. A vendor copied me on an email just to keep everyone aligned. A board member asked for my perspective on a contract my mother had previously approved without discussion. I was being reintegrated not because anyone felt guilty, but because the system now required it. That was the real shift. Control thrives in opacity. Transparency forces redistribution. My father called late one evening. "Your mother feels betrayed," he said. "She believes you're punishing her for caring." I leaned back on my couch, eyes closed. She controlled because she was afraid I said. "That doesn't make it care." She was trying to protect the family, he insisted. She was protecting her position in it, I replied. Silence stretched between us. "You could stop this," he said quietly. "You still can." I opened my eyes. "No," I said. "I can't. Because if I do, it will happen again. Maybe not to me, but to someone else." He sighed. "You've changed," he said. "Yes," I replied. I stopped prioritizing comfort over truth. That weekend, I attended my first board call as a reinstated stakeholder. Emily was there too. She barely spoke. I listened more than I talked, asking questions when things were unclear, letting silence do its work when people danced around answers. It was a skill I'd honed professionally, now finally applied where it mattered most. After the call ended, one of the board members stayed on the line. "You know," he said carefully, "this probably should have happened years ago." I didn't ask him to explain. I didn't need to. By Sunday evening, the weight of everything finally reached my body. Not as panic, as fatigue, the kind that comes after prolonged vigilance. I lay on my couch staring at the ceiling, thinking about how long I had been accommodating, how often I had mistaken compliance for peace. The betrayal wasn't just the exclusion, it was the assumption that I would accept it quietly. That assumption was gone now. The following Monday, the trustee appointment was approved. Temporary, neutral, effective. My mother didn't respond. Emily sent a single text. "I don't recognize our family anymore." I typed back one sentence. "This is what it looks like without control." She didn't reply. That night, as I shut down my laptop and turned off the lights, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not relief, stability. Because once power shifts from people to process, emotions lose their leverage. And the people who relied on them have to face something they've avoided for years. Reality. The trustee arrived without ceremony. Her name was Margaret Sloan. Early 50s. Calm voice. Precise posture. The kind of woman who didn't waste words because she didn't need to. She requested a joint meeting within 48 hours of her appointment. Not to accuse, not to interrogate, to observe. I attended remotely. My parents and Emily were there in person, seated around the long dining table I knew by heart. The same table where birthdays had been celebrated and disagreements quietly buried under dessert. Margaret didn't sit at the head. She sat slightly to the side. That mattered. She opened a leather folder and spoke evenly. "My role is temporary. I'm here to ensure fiduciary duty is upheld and that all beneficiaries are treated in accordance with law and intent. Nothing more." My mother nodded stiffly. My father folded his hands. Emily stared at the table. Margaret continued, "I will be reviewing all amendments made in the last 36 months. I'll be requesting explanations for deviations from standard practice. This is not punitive, it's corrective." She paused, then added, "If everything is in order, this will be resolved quickly." No one spoke. After the call ended, my phone rang. It was Emily. "They're asking me questions I don't know how to answer," she said. "Specific ones, like what I asked. Why certain decisions were documented as unanimous when they weren't. Why my name appears on approvals I don't remember signing." I closed my eyes briefly. "That's not your fault," I said, "but it is your responsibility." She swallowed. I could hear it. "Mom keeps saying we should push back," she said, "that this is an overreach." "And what do you think?" I asked. There was a long pause. I think she assumed you'd never challenge it," Emily said quietly. "That assumption is the problem," I replied. The next few weeks unfolded slowly, methodically. Margaret requested bank statements, meeting minutes, email correspondence, internal memos. She interviewed staff members individually, not aggressively, just thoroughly. Patterns emerged. Authority concentrated in my mother's hands. Decisions justified retroactively. Dissent framed as disloyalty. And always the same explanation. Lauren is distant. Lauren is independent. Lauren doesn't need to be involved. Margaret flagged it in her preliminary notes. That's narrative, she told Denise during one update call, not governance. I attended fewer family calls and more legal ones. My role shifted from emotional participant to factual witness. That shift was protective. It gave me space to notice something else. My parents weren't angry at first. They were offended. Offended that a structure they'd controlled privately was now being evaluated publicly. Offended that someone neutral was asking questions they'd never had to answer before. Offense slowly turned into anxiety. Anxiety into irritation. I heard it in my father's voice when he called. "This is dragging on," he said. "Your mother feels scrutinized." "She is being scrutinized," I replied. "That's the point. She's given everything to this family," he insisted. "So have I said. Just not in ways that benefited her." That ended the call. At work, I noticed how differently I move through meetings now. I didn't rush to fill silence. I didn't soften my opinions. I didn't over-explain. That carried over into my personal life, too. When a friend asked how things were with my family, I didn't minimize. I said complicated but stable. That was true. One afternoon, Denise forwarded me an email from Margaret. Preliminary findings suggests undue influence in amendment execution, recommending partial reversal pending full review. I read it twice. Then once more. Partial reversal meant the amended ownership would not stand as written. It meant my exclusion had not been justified legally. It wasn't a win. It was validation. That evening, my mother called. Not angry. "Careful. We need to talk," she said. I sat at my kitchen table, hands folded, feeling steady. "I'm listening," I said. "This has gone too far," she began. "You've made your point." "This isn't about a point," I replied. "You could stop cooperating," she said. "Refuse to participate. Let this settle privately." "That would put everything back where it was," I said. "Why would I do that?" "Because we're family," she said. There it was. The word she used when she wanted something to go away. "Family doesn't mean unaccountable," I replied. Her voice tightened. "You're risking the company," she said. "No," I said. "The lack of structure did that." She inhaled sharply. "You've always been difficult," she said. "Always questioning." I almost smiled. "That's why this is happening," I said. "Because someone finally did." She hung up. 2 days later, Emily showed up at my apartment again. She looked smaller somehow, less certain. "I didn't know it would feel like this," she said, sitting on the edge of my couch. "Like everything's unstable." "It was always unstable," I replied. "You just weren't the one it could collapse on." She nodded slowly. "They asked me if I felt pressured," she said. And I asked. I said yes. That mattered. Not because it incriminated anyone, because it broke the narrative of consent. The following week, Margaret issued her interim report. Key decisions were flagged. Authority redistribution recommended. Formal governance structures mandated. My status as beneficiary and stakeholder reaffirmed. My name appeared on paper again. Not as a favor, as a correction. The reaction was immediate. My mother stopped calling altogether. My father sounded lost. Emily oscillated between guilt and defensiveness. And me, I felt something settle. Not satisfaction. Alignment. Because for the first time, the external structure matched the internal truth I'd lived with for years. That I was not absent. I had been excluded. And exclusion only works when no one questions it. That night I slept deeply. Not because the fight was over, but because the ground beneath it had finally been exposed. And once you see the foundation clearly, you stop being afraid of cracks. The interim report didn't break my family. It revealed them. The house in Cedar Grove stayed quiet after Margaret's findings were circulated. No shouting, no slammed doors, just a careful withdrawal as if everyone was suddenly aware that every word carried weight now. Emily called less. My father stopped offering opinions. My mother disappeared behind process. That was her pattern when she lost direct control. She didn't confront. She waited. She looked for leverage. I felt it coming before it arrived. The leverage appeared as a proposal. Denise forwarded it to me on a Wednesday afternoon marked urgent. "Your parents are offering a private settlement," she wrote. "They want to avoid further review." I opened the document slowly. It was framed as reconciliation. They proposed restoring my beneficiary status partially, offering a financial adjustment, acknowledging that mistakes had been made in the interest of stability. In exchange, I would withdraw cooperation with the trustee, waive further claims, and agree to confidentiality. It was a neat offer. Clean, controlled, designed to look generous. and it missed the point entirely. I called Denise. They still think this is about money, I said. They think it always is, she replied. What happens if I refuse, I asked. They'll escalate, she said. Likely try to undermine the trustee's authority, possibly challenge her appointment. I thought about that. And if I accept, I asked. Then everything goes back to how it was, she said. Just dress better. I didn't hesitate. I refuse, I said. She didn't sound surprised. I drafted the response with Denise's help, brief, factual, polite. I declined the settlement and reaffirmed my cooperation with the trustee. No commentary. No counteroffer. The response went out that evening. The next morning, my father called. He sounded shaken. Your mother is furious, he said. I'm not surprised, I replied. She thinks you're trying to punish her. I'm trying to prevent this from happening again, I said. To anyone. He sighed heavily. She says you've turned this into a power struggle. That assumes I wanted power, I replied. I wanted fairness. There was a long silence. She's talking about contesting the report, he said. She can, I replied. The process will handle it. You've changed, he said again, quieter this time. No, I replied. I've stopped negotiating my dignity. The call ended there. That afternoon, Margaret requested individual follow-up meetings. She spoke to me last. Your refusal of the settlement is noted, she said evenly. It suggests your priority is structural correction rather than personal gain. That's accurate, I said. She nodded. Be aware, she continued, that resistance often intensifies when control is threatened. You may see attempts to shift blame. I already have, I said. She almost smiled. Good, she said. Then you're prepared. The attempts came quickly. Emily sent a message that night. Mom says you're enjoying this. I stared at it for a long time. Then I replied, I'm enduring it. There's a difference. Her response didn't come. 2 days later, a letter arrived at my apartment, handwritten, from my mother. She wrote about betrayal, about loyalty, about how families don't survive legal scrutiny. She wrote, you are dismantling something that took decades to build. I read it carefully. Then I placed it in my records folder. Because what she'd built depended on silence, and silence isn't a foundation. The trustee moved forward. She issued formal directives to the company, governance protocols, mandatory documentation, shared approvals. My mother's role was redefined, not removed, limited. That distinction mattered. She could no longer act unilaterally. That was the real consequence. Emily called the night the directive was issued. I think Mom hates me now, she said quietly. Why, I asked. Because I didn't fight it, she said. I didn't defend her. You defended yourself, I replied. She was quiet. I don't know how to live without someone else deciding things, she said. You'll learn, I said, or you won't. But it won't be my responsibility anymore. That landed harder than I expected. Not for her, for me, because I realized something important in that moment. I wasn't trying to save my family. I was saving myself from disappearing inside it. The board implemented the new structure within the week. Emails went out, meetings were scheduled, roles clarified. My presence became routine, not symbolic, not contested, just part of the system. That normalization felt surreal. One evening, I walked through my apartment, noticing how settled everything felt. No constant vigilance, no rehearsed responses waiting behind my teeth. I wasn't bracing. That was new. Later that night, Denise sent one final message. Be ready, she wrote. The final phase is approaching. I knew what she meant. This was no longer about correction. It was about permanence. The last chance for my family to accept a structure that didn't revolve around control, or to expose how much they depended on it. I went to bed that night calm. Because I had already crossed the most difficult line. I had stopped trying to be understood. And in doing so, I had become unmovable. The final phase didn't begin with confrontation. It began with deadlines. Margaret issued them calmly, almost gently. Dates by which responses were required. Dates by which documents had to be submitted. Dates by which decisions would be made with or without cooperation. Control hates deadlines it didn't set. My mother responded the way she always had when backed into a corner. She reframed. A letter went out to extended family, carefully worded, emotionally loaded. She spoke about misunderstanding, about legal overreach, about a daughter who had become distant and combative. I heard about it from a cousin who called me hesitantly. I just wanted to check in, she said. Your mom sounds hurt. I'm sure she does, I replied. Is it really that bad, she asked. It's exactly what it looks like when boundaries are enforced, I said. She didn't know how to respond to that. That was fine. At work, I noticed something else shifting. People who had once deferred to my mother began asking me direct questions. Not out of loyalty, out of clarity. They needed answers grounded in process, not emotion. One afternoon, the CFO asked if I could review a proposed restructuring of supplier contracts. I want a second set of eyes, he said. Neutral ones. That word again. Neutral. It had become my role without me asking for it. Emily stopped calling. Not abruptly, gradually. Her messages grew shorter, then less frequent, then stopped altogether. I didn't chase her. Chasing would have implied I still needed her validation. The real escalation came when my mother attempted to remove Margaret. She filed a motion contesting the trustee's authority, citing undue disruption and emotional distress. Denise forwarded it to me with a single line. She's making it personal. That weakens her position. The hearing was scheduled quickly. I attended this one in person. The room was small, plain, designed for efficiency, not drama. Margaret sat composed, notes neatly arranged. My parents sat together. Emily sat slightly apart. My mother didn't look at me. When she spoke, her voice was steady but tight. This process has caused unnecessary harm, she said. It's tearing our family apart. The judge listened patiently. Then Margaret spoke. This process did not create conflict, she said. It revealed it. She outlined her findings succinctly. Documented influence, procedural violations, narrative substitution in place of consent. When my turn came, I stood. I didn't speak long. I didn't initiate this because I was angry, I said. I initiated it because decisions were made about my life without my knowledge. I stayed silent for years. That silence was mistaken for permission. The judge nodded. The motion was denied. Margaret remained. That was the moment my mother finally looked at me. Not with anger, with something closer to disbelief, as if she was seeing me clearly for the first time and realizing she no longer recognized me. After the hearing, my father approached me in the hallway. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly. Yes, I replied, I did. He shook his head slightly. I don't know how we come back from this. I met his eyes. That depends on whether you see this as loss, I said, or correction. He didn't answer. The final report was issued 2 weeks later. It was thorough, unemotional, decisive. The amended ownership was voided. Governance reforms were mandated permanently. My status as equal beneficiary was restored in full. An external advisory board was recommended for a minimum of 5 years. My mother's authority was formally constrained, not removed. Contained. Emily's role was clarified as participant, not proxy. The family structure changed on paper first. Everything else followed. The house in Cedar Grove was put on the market shortly after. My mother said it was too big. My father said it held too many memories. I understood what it really meant. It no longer represented control. Emily moved farther away. New town, new routine. She sent me one message. I don't know who I am without Mom directing things. I read it twice, then replied, That's something you get to figure out. She didn't answer. The company adjusted. Meetings ran longer but cleaner. Decisions took time but stuck. Employees spoke up more. Mistakes were addressed early. It wasn't perfect. It was real. One evening, Denise called to tell me everything was finalized. No further action, she said. This is the structure now. I thanked her. After we hung up, I sat alone in my apartment, the city quiet outside my window. I thought about the person I had been when this started. The one who believed inclusion was something you earned by being agreeable. That person wouldn't have survived this. The one sitting here now had learned something harder. That being excluded hurts less than being erased slowly. That silence is powerful only when it's chosen. And that the most effective revenge isn't humiliation or punishment, it's permanence. A structure that doesn't need you to fight anymore. As I turned off the lights and went to bed, I felt something settle deep in my chest. Not triumph. Finality. The kind that doesn't demand witnesses. After the final report, everyone expected something to happen. A confrontation, an apology, a collapse. None of that came. What came instead was distance so complete it felt intentional. My mother stopped reaching out entirely. Not even indirect messages. Not through my father. Not through extended family. It was as if she had sealed off a room of her life and decided not to enter it again. At first, I thought it was punishment. Then I realized it was retreat. Control doesn't argue when it loses. It withdraws and rewrites the story somewhere else. My father called once a few weeks after everything was finalized. His voice sounded thinner, less anchored. The house sale is moving fast, he said. Your mother wants a clean break. A break from what I asked. He didn't answer directly. She says the place doesn't feel like home anymore. I knew what she meant. The house had stopped being a command center. Without unilateral authority, it was just walls and furniture. I'm sorry, he added quietly. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't nothing. I know, I said. We didn't talk long. At work, the effects of the new structure became visible in subtle ways. People prepared more. Meetings were less performative. Decisions slowed, but they stuck. One afternoon, the operations director stopped by my office. "You know," he said, leaning against the doorframe, "things are calmer." I smiled slightly. "Clarity does that," I said. He nodded. "We should have had this years ago." Maybe. But systems rarely change until someone is willing to absorb the discomfort of changing them. Outside of work, my life grew quieter in ways I hadn't expected. Not emptier, lighter. I stopped checking my phone compulsively. I stopped rehearsing explanations for choices no one had the right to question. I started sleeping without that low-grade tension I'd lived with for years. One evening, while cleaning out a drawer, I found an old birthday card from my mother, written years earlier, full of pride, full of affection. I sat on the floor and read it slowly. Then I put it back. Not everything broken needs to be destroyed. Some things are simply no longer active. Emily reached out once. A short message. "I don't know how to talk to you now." I read it carefully before replying. "You don't have to," I wrote, "not until you're ready to talk without roles." She didn't respond. Weeks passed, then months. The company thrived quietly. The advisory board became routine. My role settled into something steady, respected, unremarkable in the best way. No one questioned my presence anymore. That mattered more than recognition. One Saturday morning, I drove past my parents' old house without meaning to. The sign out front read, "Sold." The windows were bare, the yard trimmed by someone else. I pulled over for a moment, not out of grief, out of closure. That chapter was done. Later that day, Denise called to check in. Not as my lawyer, as someone who had watched the whole thing unfold. "You did something most people don't," she said. "You didn't try to win. You tried to correct." "I just didn't want it to happen again," I said. "That's how real power shifts," she replied, quietly. That night, sitting alone in my apartment, I realized something that surprised me. I didn't feel victorious. I felt complete. The urge to explain myself to my family was gone. The need to be seen by them had loosened its grip. I had chosen structure over approval, process over permission. And in doing so, I had taken back something far more valuable than money or inheritance. My authorship, of my life, of my choices, of my silence. The final chapter wasn't about what my family lost. It was about what I refused to lose ever again. And that realization carried me forward steady and unafraid into whatever came next. The real test came when no one was watching anymore. That's when patterns try to return. It happened quietly, almost politely, in early December. My father called in the afternoon, his voice careful in a way I recognized immediately. "Your mother wants to do Christmas," he said. "Just dinner, nothing formal." There it was. Tradition offered as a reset button. I stood by my kitchen window watching people move along the sidewalk, below each of them carrying their own versions of obligation. At the new place, I asked. "Yes," he said, "she thinks it might help." Help whom was left unsaid. "I need to think about it," I replied. That night, I didn't rush to decide. I sat with the question the way I had learned to sit with documents and deadlines. I examined it from every angle. What would I be agreeing to by walking into that room? Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, access. And access, once returned without accountability, becomes expectation again. 2 days later, my mother called. Her voice was softer than usual, but no less controlled. "I hear you're unsure about Christmas," she said. "I am," I replied. "That hurts," she said. "After everything we've been through." Everything we've been through. Not everything she had orchestrated. "I'm not avoiding you," I said. "I'm protecting myself." She exhaled sharply. "You can't live your life in defense mode forever," she said. "I'm not," I replied. "I'm living it intentionally." She was quiet for a moment. "You've always been so rigid," she said. "That's why things escalated." I almost smiled. "No," I said. "Things escalated because my silence stopped working." Her tone tightened. "So you're punishing us." I let the silence stretch. "I'm choosing boundaries," I said. "They just feel like punishment to people who benefited from having none." The line went quiet. When we hung up, I felt something click into place. This wasn't about whether I attended dinner. It was about whether I would step back into a dynamic that no longer fit. I declined the invitation the next morning, briefly, kindly, without explanation. My father didn't push. My mother didn't respond. Christmas passed quietly. I cooked for myself, opened a bottle of wine, and spent the evening reading on my couch, while the city hummed outside. There was no loneliness, only peace. In January, the advisory board finalized long-term governance recommendations. Everything Margaret had proposed was adopted. Permanent oversight, clear succession planning, no more unilateral authority. The structure held. That was the final confirmation I needed. Not that I had won, but that I was no longer necessary as a counterweight. The system could function without my vigilance. Emily reached out once more that winter. "I think Mom's waiting for you to come back," she wrote. I stared at the message, then typed slowly. "I didn't leave," I wrote. "I stepped out of a role that was hurting me." She replied minutes later. "I don't know how to do that." "You will," I wrote, "or you'll decide not to, but it has to be your choice." She didn't answer. Spring came early that year. The air softened. Days lengthened. My life settled into routines that felt earned instead of inherited. One evening, as I walked home from work, I passed a cafe filled with people laughing over small tables, lives intersecting briefly before moving on. I realized something then. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for approval, not for apology, not for an invitation. The power shift everyone expected to look dramatic had already happened months ago. It happened the moment I stopped asking to be included and started insisting on structure instead of affection. That was the quietest revenge of all. And it lasted. Time did what confrontation never could. It clarified. The months after Christmas passed without incident, and that absence was revealing. No sudden emergencies. No emotional appeals disguised as concern. No attempts to pull me back into orbit under the guise of family unity. My mother held her distance. Not out of respect, but calculation. She was adjusting to a version of reality where influence no longer flowed through her automatically. My father called occasionally, short conversations, safe topics, weather, health, the market. He never mentioned the company unless I did, and even then his tone carried a quiet deference I had never heard before. He was learning new rules. Emily disappeared almost completely. At first I worried about her. Then I recognized the pattern. She was recalibrating too, trying to understand who she was, without someone else setting the parameters of her choices. That work takes time and solitude. At Whitaker Components, the new structure settled in like a long overdue renovation. Slower, yes, but sturdier. Decisions moved through proper channels. Disagreements were documented instead of buried. Authority became shared, not assumed. People stopped bracing. One afternoon, the advisory board chair pulled me aside after a meeting. "You know, he said this company runs better without emotional shortcuts." I nodded. "They always fail eventually," I said. He smiled slightly. "You saw that early." I didn't correct him. I hadn't seen it early, I had lived inside it. Outside of work, my life expanded in subtle ways. I reconnected with friends I'd kept at arm's length while managing family expectations. I traveled alone for the first time without checking in or justifying the expense. I noticed how often I used to explain myself. That habit faded. In late April, I received a letter from my mother. Not long, not dramatic. She wrote that she missed me, that the new house didn't feel settled yet, that she was still adjusting. She did not apologize. She did not ask to see me. She wrote, "I hope someday you understand I did what I thought was best." I read it once, then I placed it in a drawer. Understanding was no longer my obligation. A week later, Emily called. Her voice sounded different, less tight, less defensive. "I started therapy," she said without preamble. I waited. "They asked me who I was when no one was watching," she continued. I didn't have an answer. I leaned back in my chair. "That's a hard place to start," I said. "But a real one," she replied. She hesitated. "I don't blame you anymore," she said quietly. "I think I blamed you because it was easier than blaming the system I depended on." I absorbed that slowly. "I'm not asking for anything," she added quickly. "I just wanted you to know." "Thank you," I said. And I meant it. We didn't talk long. We didn't need to. That summer, my father's health took a brief scare. Nothing serious. Enough to remind everyone that time was not unlimited. I visited the hospital once. Just once. The room was quiet. My mother sat by the window. My father lay resting. She looked up when I entered, surprise flickering across her face before she masked it. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I wanted to," I replied. That distinction mattered. We spoke politely, carefully, like people learning a new language. When I left, she didn't stop me. She didn't ask when I'd come again. That restraint told me more than words ever had. A month later, the final oversight review concluded. The advisory board recommended continuation. The trustee's role officially ended. The structure held on its own. No appeals. No objections. The system no longer required my presence as leverage. That was the true ending. One evening, as I sat alone on my balcony watching the city settle into dusk, I thought about how far this had traveled from that first calendar invite I was never meant to see. How a small exclusion had revealed a much larger truth. That love had been conditional, that belonging had been transactional, that silence had been mistaken for consent. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't demanded apologies. I hadn't tried to be understood. I had simply stepped into process and let it speak. The distance that followed wasn't punishment, it was consequence. And consequences, when they're honest, don't need to be enforced forever. They just need to exist long enough to change behavior. I didn't know what my relationship with my family would look like in 5 years. But I knew one thing with certainty. It would never again be built on my disappearance. The ending didn't arrive with a decision. It arrived with a morning where nothing needed to be decided at all. I woke up one Saturday in late summer and realized I hadn't thought about my mother, my father, or Emily in days. Not with effort, not with avoidance, just absence. The kind that means something has finally settled into its proper place. I made coffee and stood by the window watching the city move at its own pace. People walking dogs, someone arguing gently on a phone, a delivery truck double parked like it always was. Life continued without waiting for my family to resolve anything. That was the moment I understood the shift was complete. Not legally, not structurally, personally. The company no longer required my vigilance. The governance held. The advisory board functioned. My role was steady, respected, unremarkable in the best way. I wasn't proving anything anymore, and I wasn't protecting myself anymore either. I was simply living. Emily sent one last message that fall. I think I finally understand what you meant about roles. I read it carefully. What role? I wrote back. The one where I stayed small so everything else stayed stable, she replied. I didn't answer right away. Then I typed, you don't have to disappear to belong. She sent a single word back. I know. That was enough. My father and I spoke occasionally after that. Short calls, no pressure, no subtext. He stopped asking when I would visit and started asking how I was. It was subtle, but it mattered. My mother remained distant, not cold, just removed. I didn't chase her. Some relationships can't be repaired because they were never built on mutual recognition in the first place. They were built on hierarchy. Hierarchy doesn't survive equality, and that's not tragedy. It's truth. One evening, while organizing old files, I came across the original screenshot of that calendar invite. The one that started everything. Estate planning review, final signatures. I stared at it for a long time, then I deleted it. Not because it no longer mattered, but because it no longer held power. I thought about the version of myself who stood in that kitchen months earlier, coffee growing cold, confusion tightening in her chest. She believed exclusion meant failure. That being left out meant she had done something wrong. She was wrong. She had been removed because she couldn't be controlled quietly enough, and that realization had changed everything. I didn't forgive my family in the way people expect forgiveness to look. There was no ceremony, no declaration, no absolution. Forgiveness for me became something quieter. It became the moment I stopped needing an outcome from them. It became the moment I stopped waiting for them to understand. It became the moment I chose structure over sentiment and peace over proximity. I didn't win. I reclaimed. There's a difference. Winning implies competition. Reclaiming implies ownership. The lesson I carried forward wasn't about revenge or karma or payback, even though those words might fit from the outside. It was about boundaries, about recognizing when love is offered only in exchange for compliance, about understanding that being included at the cost of your autonomy isn't belonging. It's captivity. The most important thing I learned was this: you don't have to argue with people who benefit from misunderstanding you. You don't have to explain yourself to those who rewrite your silence as consent. And you don't have to stay where your presence is tolerated only when it's convenient. Sometimes the strongest move isn't confrontation, it's refusal. Refusal to play the role, refusal to shrink, refusal to disappear quietly. If you've ever been excluded by your own family, if you've ever been erased from decisions that shaped your life, if you've ever been told you were too independent, too distant, too difficult simply because you wouldn't surrender control, remember this: silence is only weakness when it's imposed. When it's chosen, it becomes power. Choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's structural. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like, comment, or subscribe. Tell me where you're listening from and what choosing yourself looked like in your life.